And welcome to the fastest growing podcast in the history of the known universe, unless one of the hosts dies. It is the Falconcast, and we are here to have a lot of fun with you today because the legendary AJ Hoffman is here, and we're going to get to him in just a second. But before we get started, I want to tell you about the University of Houston Letter Winners Association having their 46th annual H Association barbecue. Football coach Willie Fritz will be there. Athletic director Chris Pesman, Cougar legends like Otis Birdsong, Bo Burris, David Klingler, and more. This is going to be Saturday, March the 9th. And if my head's right, I'm going to be there. A lot of cool people. Dwight Davis is going to be there. They're going to auction off 2 fishing trips and a hunting trip, and it benefits student athletes. And all of this money goes to the student athletes at UH. So if you have a chance, here are your prices. They're pretty. They're actually really reasonable. $25 gets you in, and that's it. And so they've got other packages for sponsors, all kinds of stuff going on, and I'm excited about it. And the reality is, it's just it's a cool thing that they do. The H Association is fantastic. And if I can pull this up, I'll tell you the other stuff that you need to know. But yeah, it's a really, really cool thing that they do. And so you can go, and it's going to be the day of the Kansas game. So it's 11:30 to 2 p.m. on Saturday, March 9th at the TDEC Stadium Club. And one ticket's $25. You can get 4 for $85. You want to do a $250 sponsorship, you get 6 tickets.
Someone just called Fred. That's what happens when someone calls him.
You can get 10 tickets, and a $750, you can get 14. All you have to do is go to uhletterwinners.com. That's uhletterwinners.com, and they will take care of you. And I want to welcome everybody in today, especially the legendary AJ Hoffman, who, first off, I need to I got to apologize to for last week, and it wasn't anything that I actually did. But by the end of the show, I obviously was making no sense whatsoever. And
I just thought the vodka waters were strong.
No, I had, you know what? And this is where it was weird. I had 3 drinks all day. I had 1 before I went over there, and I had 2 during the show. And so when the show was over, I'm like, what the hell is wrong with me? I can't think. I can't stand up. And I'm like, unless that was like pure 500% alcohol, which it wasn't, something was wrong. So I told the story Monday. I'm not going to revisit the whole thing, but I mean, AJ knows most of it. But yeah, I made the dumb mistake of taking a piece of an edible from someone, and turns out it was spiked with shit I would never put in my body. And I passed out.
Steroids?
I wish. I'd be like, oh, that would have been a good one. Yeah. But no, I mean, and so I passed out right after the show. I tried to get an Uber. I vaguely remember that. And I fell down on the sidewalk and couldn't get up. And so thankfully, my good friends at the Leaf came in and took me inside and put me on the couch. And my good friend Nate came over, and Aaron, his girlfriend, and they called my friend Dana and her son Ethan, and they all got me home. And everybody thought I was better. And then I go to walk to my bed and just collapse again and hit my head on the side of the bed. And when I woke up, fortunately I had my phone. I was able to call an ambulance and go to the hospital. And yeah, they found a bunch of crap in me. And, I'm getting lectured by this nurse about, you should never take this. I'm like, fuck, I don't ever take it. What are you talking about? And then after that, the bad part was I fell about 4 times, and really, I've had concussion problems a lot lately, and this one is the worst one I've had that I can actually remember. And so, I have good moments and bad. And Lamont says, "Yeah, you're way too old for these rookie mistakes. Come on, big bro." You're right. And part of it is the doctor said, "Well, you've had this concussion for a while, and it makes you prone to stupid decisions." I'm like, "Well, good. I'll blame it on that, and not the fact that I was just a fucking idiot." But
can you tell your divorce lawyer that?
Oh,
I was concussed when I gave her that RV.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good idea. Yeah. I was like, hey, check it out. By the way, welcome in Chuck D, Flip, Spirit, Smoky Route, Felipe, Virginia Buttonweed, And of course, Lamont, man, so glad to see all you guys. So here's the cool part, though. So my doctor's telling me these things I need to do to try to focus, right? It's like, well, you should do a crossword every day. You should do Sudoku. I'm like, man, I don't do that shit. I go, what about poker? It's like, that's good. That'll make your mind work. So guess what I did last night? What's up, B-Hand?
Played some poker.
I went over back to the Leaf, and I wanted to thank everybody for taking care of me too, because, and honestly, if I'd eaten any more of that, I wouldn't be here. And I worry about if I'd even gotten in that Uber and got home, whether I make it up the stairs or whether I crash on the concrete and bash my head. I mean, there's so many things that could have gone wrong. So yeah, but I went and played last night and bought in for 60 and cashed out for a whole bunch. And
all right, that means the concussion didn't hurt you.
No. Well, you know what I was so focused on is really cool. So like the things, he's told me, do things that, keep your mind occupied, right? So like the podcast on Monday was great. The poker was great. And then today I went to lunch with a friend of mine who's a really brilliant guy. And we're talking about stories that I should be writing and all this stuff. And so it's really helping, but I still have moments where, and even last night, there's one of my friends I've played with forever and I couldn't remember his name when I sat at the table. And usually I suck at names anyway, but once I know your name, you've known this about me forever, right? Once I got you, I never forget it.
That's like the opposite of me. I don't remember anyone's name ever.
But yeah, I forgot his name, and I sat there and waited till somebody said something to him. I'm like, oh goddamn! Now I know who that is.
I just say, hey, buddy.
But yeah, it's so today's been a good day. It's like good and bad days. There's times where I do stupid stuff like. I told him Monday I went out for a cigarette on Sunday, and I'm like, where the hell's my lighter? It was in my hand the whole time. Shit like that, and you're just like, oh, fuck. But you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to beat this just like I've beaten everything else over the last year and a half. And there's going to be moments where I sound stupid. Guess what? That's been the show forever.
That's true.
Forever. Yeah.
Nothing's different.
There's nothing new there, man. And so, yeah, it's all good. Welcome in Zed. Welcome in Chuck Norris, Big Freaky Mike, all you guys on my way for your bitch. So anyway, I'm dealing with it. And, the hard part is like some of my friends just don't get it. Like, man, just man up. It's like, well, okay. Yeah. How? It's like, it's my fucking brain, man. I got no clues. But it's all going to be fine. And, there's a chance that I just got to not fall down. And I'm being careful. I'm not going anywhere. I went to lunch today, but my friend's setting up stuff for me on the stairs. So I'll have extra lights and shit like that so that I won't fall down. And, just little things that you have to do. And I know it's old. I'm being old, but also part of it is just, don't die, bitch. That's kind of where I am. But I appreciate you carrying me at the end there, and for most, you always carry me, so it doesn't matter. But
yeah, same old, no big deal.
But yeah, so I will toast everyone with Diet Coke today.
Ooh. Okay, good. That's what they're telling you. They're recommending while you're on your concussion protocol.
Well, no, he says I can have a couple drinks, but he told me, make sure.
You rarely have a couple drinks.
Well, and that's and that's something I'm trying to adjust to. And he was telling me, make sure. If you like when you're playing poker, make sure you're with some friends who, remind you you're not supposed to just sit there and slam drinks the whole time.
Yeah.
And of course, once I start winning hands, I'm like, oh no, I'm not drinking anything. I'm going to take some soul. And don't think I wasn't playing up the concussion thing. Like, did you get the flush? I'm like, I don't even remember what I had.
Is a flush all black? Like club dance? I don't know.
What's that from Ocean's 11? All red.
Yeah.
And so one of my friends, he asked me at the end, he goes, do you really have a concussion? I'm like, yeah, I really do. But I was totally fucking with you guys on most of this shit. And my favorite was my friend dropped me off last night. He's got 2 kids, and so he was really getting after me over some things. And I'm like, hey man, just do me a favor, go home and hug your wife and 3 kids. You motherfucker. So there are jokes to be had here. And believe me, I'm going to have them.
There's always jokes to be had. We all know that.
God, yeah. If I can't joke about it, what's the fucking point of having it?
Exactly.
Yeah, give it to somebody else. Let them fret about it and feel sorry for themselves and play victim. Fuck that. I'm going to make jokes about it. I'm going to use it at the poker table. So there.
I like it.
So what's going on with you, brother?
Busy times, man. It's obviously college basketball stuff going, and I had to go buy a car yesterday, which is the worst thing ever. Just I don't know, doing normal life stuff. And then we've got our big podcast tonight during the off season. We're gonna have it on Thursdays instead of Wednesdays. So just hectic work stuff, and just trying to keep my irons in the fire, Freddie. You know the deal. Always looking for something fun to get my hands on.
And that's the way to do it, man. And I'm trying to do the same thing when I don't forget that I'm trying to have fun. So and I saw you tweet something about UH earlier this week, and obviously big week when you go in and you beat the number 6 team at home, then you go on the road and beat Baylor. And I want to ask you a question about Baylor that I kind of brought up Monday, but your thoughts on them moving forward. I think their resume says they should be number 1. I don't know if they're the best team. I get so fucking sick of listening to ESPN and said, "Oh, UConn should be number 1. I don't care if they lose every game the rest of the way." It's a poll.
Yeah.
And when you lose in a poll or you win a big game in a poll, you move up or you move down. It doesn't mean shit. They're all going to be 1 seed. But your thoughts?
I think that there's a real argument to be made that Houston is the best team in the country, and the analytics say that they are. They've lost a couple road games, including that loss at Kansas, which is, was an ugly loss. Let's face it. The other 2 weren't, though. But guess what? UConn's lost some road games too, including at Kansas, and they had some ugly ones. They got blown out at Seton Hall, blown out at Creighton just recently. They're not as good as they were a year ago. They are a flawed team, and that's what it really boils down to. Is there's not a team in the country that doesn't have some kind of warts, and Houston right now, to me, is falling into the category of, I think they can overcome their warts. Like what they do well, they do so well that I think it can make up for what they don't do well, which is, it's weird to say it because it's the opposite of my usual thinking. Usually I think if you can't score consistently, I don't want anything to do with you come tournament time. But I've watched them just torment elite offenses and make them look terrible. Like what they did to Baylor in the first half of that game over the weekend was so impressive. Like that Baylor offense just looked lost. And the reality of that game was Baylor shot better than UH. Baylor like dominated on the glass. So if you say that, Baylor was going to shoot 40% from 3 and out rebound Houston by almost double digits, I would have said, oh, well, Houston's screwed. Well, what you didn't account for was the 19 turnovers that Houston created. And they throw your offense out of whack and you give away all these possessions. And that's pretty much the standard is the turnovers. Normally they win the rebounding battle too. So when you win the rebounding battle and you get all those turnovers, you just have so many more opportunities at offense that typically you're blowing teams out, even if you're not super efficient on that side of the ball, which Houston is not. Obviously the second half, there's cause for concern. The way that they melted that game was tough to watch. But the reality was, I mean, when it came to nut cutting time in overtime, they were the much better team, and they got the defensive stops, and that's against a really good Baylor offense. And you're talking about one of the top 5 or 6 offenses in the country. Will they see offenses like that in the tournament? If they go deep enough, they sure will. But absolutely, it just lets you know that they can handle those. And really, you've got to think about how they lost last year. It's almost like it has to be a perfect storm to beat this team. And I said they've got warts, so I'm not saying they're unbeatable at all. But it took Miami basically just going nuclear from three. And
Yeah.
when they do that, like if Miami goes, if they go shoot 50% from three, if any team does that to UH in the tournament, they probably beat them.
Yeah.
It's just hard to do, especially I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember it correctly, Houston had a pretty terrible night shooting threes as well. That was a more 3-point reliant team than this one, when they had Trayvon Mark and those guys. But it feels like this is this team is as good as any. I like them better than UConn and Purdue right now, because I feel like that defense is going to terrorize all teams, even the most elite teams, the most elite offenses. And if they can just not be awful on that side of the ball, they're going to win more games than they lose. And like I think they should be a one-loss team. That's how close
Right.
those other two games were. And then we're not having this discussion. So I'm not letting two games that happened on the road in early January dictate my opinion on this team. What they did, again, that win at Baylor, that should shut up doubters. Not only that, but they win and won at BYU. They won the game at Texas. Like, they've done enough to prove to me that they're for real. Would I've liked to see more tough road scheduling, like in the non-con? Yeah, they played Xavier and handled them. Would I've liked to see another game or two against a Power 5 team in there? Yeah, but I still think that this conference, the Big 12, is setting them up in a way that they haven't in the past, like being prepared for the tournament in a way that the American just couldn't prepare them. So playing against Baylor, playing against Kansas, like these are teams that they would have never gotten to see, or at least certainly not seen twice when they were in the American. So this it's sharpening that iron to a different level. And not that the Big East hasn't done it for UConn. I don't think the Big Ten's done it for Purdue. I don't think the Big Ten's a particularly good league.
No,
I think Purdue is like, they're so reliant on one guy that I just won't buy into them. There was a prop out here, Purdue or UConn versus the field, and I was like, that's crazy. I'll give me the field.
Yeah.
And the field was like minus 330, but I still think that's a good bet. It's just I think Houston is as good as UConn, if not better. And they just last year they ran into one of those games that it threw them off, and it takes luck to win the tournament too, Fred. You know that.
Absolutely.
If it was just about who the best team is, it'd be easy, but it's not always about that. And like, let's remember that UConn a year ago, like I know they kind of ran roughshod through the tournament, but they lost in the Big East tournament, and they probably should have ended up playing Creighton in the finals. Creighton gets a bad foul call against San Diego State, and Creighton goes out of there, and Creighton, they split with UConn that year and were probably playing better ball at the time. So UConn got a good run last year. They played a St. Mary's team that just didn't have the offensive firepower. They played, I think they played Gonzaga in the Sweet 16 or Elite 8, something like that. That was just kind of running out of gas. And then they played Miami and San Diego State, two teams that were like analytically just kind of meh in the Final Four. And I think Gonzaga was the only top 10 team that they played in their tournament run. And that's just from a KenPom top 10, not AP top 10, but from an analytics standpoint, it's rare to go through a run like that and not face elite competition. So a lot of it is just how things break. But I think this Houston team is right there. I expect them to be in the Final Four this season is my expectation.
Well, if the tournament went exactly as it was supposed to, we'd all have perfect brackets every year. I mean, the reality is, so much of it is things have to fall your way. And we've seen that. And a team like Kentucky could get in the right spot, and all of a sudden the bad matchups lose in front of them. And the next thing you know, you look up and Kentucky's in the Final Four. And I think those kind of things can happen. And sometimes, and you mentioned the Miami game last year, the one thing I mean, I've got some positives and some negatives to say about UH, but the one positive is, you talk about the Kansas loss. That's the one game that they just weren't in all year.
Yeah.
And Kansas beat them at in Kansas, which is a tough place to play, especially the first time you're going there in a conference game. But the thing is, they haven't. The other losses were games they easily could have won, as you mentioned. They should have won the TCU game. That was almost a fluke. And then Iowa State, they missed free throws at the end. And what I've noticed is they've gotten better on the road since then. And you mentioned BYU, you mentioned Texas. I mean, they've gone into some tough barns and won games. Baylor, that and some of the Big 12 is just kind of luck of the draw on where you have to go on the road and at home. And I think that the concerns I have still, they are prone to these stretches where they can't score, and we saw that in the Baylor game. We saw it a little bit in Cincinnati on Tuesday night. And the problem with that is this year that hasn't been the same because Jamal Shed will just take over. Well, he's had 2 really bad games in a row for him shooting the ball.
Yeah.
I think he was 0 for 19 at one point. Although, God, I so wish he'd gotten that 3 off before the buzzer against Baylor. What a great way to end the game, right? Guy who hadn't made a shot.
Yeah, it was pretty damn close.
Yeah,
but I mean, it also tells you like the margins, because if Missy doesn't miss the free throw, then Baylor wins outright, which is like, it's a game of inches, certainly. And I think it goes back to something I said last week is I don't know that there's any team that's like super elite or unbeatable. I don't see that in this group. And I think there's probably 10 or 12 teams that can win it. And obviously home court in the regular season plays such a vital role. But when they're all on a neutral, I think a lot of these teams are a lot closer than people think they are. And I think we're going to get some. I think it's going to make for a really fun March, because I think almost anything can happen. But again, like it's a game of inches. If that free throw falls for Missy, then maybe people aren't looking at Houston as one of the best teams, or you can look at it as maybe they're not looking at them as the best team, and that provides value, because I mean, it's clear with Missy shooting free throws, it's about a 50-50 proposition there. If he makes it, is somehow Houston not as good? No, obviously not. So I just think that this is set up for a team that plays a consistent style and understands what they're going to get. And I think the one thing you can control is defensive effort. And it's there every single game for them. It really is. I mean, I guess you can kind of look at that Kansas game and go, what the hell happened? You can make that argument to me.
But every good team has at least 3 or 4 of those games.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not where they lost by 2 at the buzzer, but they lose by 10 on the road.
Sure. And that's going to happen. And it was a bad shooting night for UH too, if you recall. But there's going to be nights where UConn, their shot's not going, or there's going to be nights where Purdue, where Zach Edey gets in foul trouble or something. And then they're fucked. We saw it the other day when Kansas played BYU. If Hunter Dickinson doesn't make his free throws, shit, you're just going to keep fouling him, and he's going to keep missing free throws, and it let BYU win a game at Kansas. And of course, I mean, listen, Kansas right now is shorthanded. Like arguably their best player is out. So take it with a grain of salt that BYU beat them there. But I mean, you said it. It's very difficult to win at Kansas. I don't care who's on the floor. But if Hunter Dickinson makes those free throws, is anybody more, worried about Kansas? No, probably not. So it's weird how it's working out, but every team has a weakness. But like I said, the one thing I believe is Houston's defensive effort is going to be there every single game. And if that, so even when they shoot like shit, which, they're apt to do, don't get me wrong. It's going to happen. They're a bad shooting team. And you said they lost the game on free throws. Yeah, it's because they're shitty at shooting free throws. So that's going to happen. But if you tell me a game in the tournament, the final score in the Houston game was 57-53, I feel pretty good about that. I feel like that's the kind of game Houston's comfortable playing. And, when you put that on a neutral, and honestly, if you put that Iowa State game on a neutral, I don't think there's a question that Houston wins that game. I think we know how important home court advantage is, and Iowa State got like, I don't know, 10 or 12 more free throw attempts in that game than Houston did. And Houston at home, it's basically a wrestling match. They just let it go wild. And then, the TCU game, there was a huge free throw discrepancy. So in Kansas, there's always going to be a free throw discrepancy at the Phog. And part of that is Houston plays so physical, that they're going to get called for fouls, particularly on the road, and they may in neutral sites too. But again, that defensive effort's there, and having something that is going to be there for 6 games makes me believe that they can do it. Because if you told me BYU is going to shoot great in the first 3 games, and then they're going to shoot 25% from 3 in the 4th game, I'd say, well, they lose the 4th game, because that's what they have to do to win. You can't convince me that a Kelvin Sampson team is just going to show up and be like, yeah, we're not going to bust our ass tonight. We're going to be kind of lax. And the other advantage that they have, I feel like I'm blabbing here, I'm sorry.
No, you're
good. The other advantage that they have is, I think Houston, the only way you're going to beat that team is on they're not going to lose the first game, obviously, but I think it's either got to be, you got to beat them in the Sweet 16 or you got to beat them in the Final Four. If they get to the Final Four and win their first matchup, I think they'll win the championship, because I think preparing for this team on 1 day notice is a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that you have to really like prepare yourself for that physical type of game, and prepare like, okay, what do we do when we're trapped here? What's our outlet? Because you're going to face a defense that you're going to face a level of pressure that you're not going to get anywhere else. You can't replicate in practice even. So I think that they're going to be vulnerable when let's say they get through the first weekend leading up to that Sweet 16 team. I mean, it's very matchup dependent, obviously, but if there's a good 4 seed who is well prepared, I could see them giving Houston some trouble. Or in the Final Four, when they've had a week to prepare, I can see them giving Houston some trouble. But I think if you catch them in the Elite 8, good luck. Like, you're not beating that team on 1 day notice. Like, you have to be over prepared to play that team. And that's something that I don't think, the only other team I could maybe say that about is Purdue, because like preparing to try and slow down Zach Edey is so difficult. But even that is, you just throw enough bodies at him. You say, okay, well, we're going to use up this many fouls. You can't, like, your offense, whatever you do, whatever rhythm your offense is in, is going to be thrown into the dumpster when you play UH on a day notice. So I think that's a real edge for the Cougars.
Well, and the thing about Purdue is, we saw it last year. You just triple team Edey, and
make somebody else
beat you. And if they do, great, and that happens. But can you survive the whole tournament with that? The teams that I think are interesting, you mentioned BYU. I think Auburn, Alabama, teams that can really fill it up and shoot. If they get hot, those are the kind of teams that could get them. I mean, BYU played the hell out of them at BYU. I think that. But one thing I'll point out about UH, and welcome into Bleed Blue and Slopez and our buddy Raj, who unfortunately had to run the
Orale, cabrón.
Yeah, he had to run the game last night, so he couldn't play. But the thing that has really improved, and we've seen this, and Kelvin does this every year, he finds little things that make his team better. We talked about the free throws. Late in games, I mean, almost nobody is shooting free throws now except for Sharp, Cryer, or Shed. They're running the plays to get them the ball and get them fouled. And those guys are all 80%ers. And that makes a difference in a close game. And yeah, you may miss 3 or 4 because some of these guys can't shoot a free throw to save their life. But if you get the ball in those guys' hands late in the game, then the free throws aren't going to matter, because they're going to make their share. And that's what they've been doing. And I've been real impressed. And I also have, of course, I have little concerns. Like, are they going to be worn out by the tournament? Because they play with so much intensity all the time. And, there is a concern about that, especially with the schedule, man. And, the other thing I'll say is their preseason schedule is actually better in retrospect than we thought it was. I mean, they beat Dayton, basically a home game for Dayton, even though it was a neutral court. Aggie hasn't turned out to be that great, but that was a win over Power 5. So they've actually got some decent wins. from before they got in the Big 12. And, and if you look at their numbers, they're better in the Big 12 than they were then. And
Yep.
that's another Kelvin Sampson attribute. And I think they're 16th in the country in scoring. So, I mean, they're not just a crap scoring team. They're not elite or good, but, so much of it's the rebounds and things like that. But I think they're 16th in the country. And if you're 16th in that and first in defense and you can sustain that throughout the tournament, I think you'll be okay.
You know who's really been kind of an unsung hero for this Houston team? And you probably watch them closer than I do, but every time I watch them, I'm so impressed with Javier Francis. Like he's always been a great defensive player. Like the last 2 games, I thought he was elite defensively.
Yeah.
I mean, his shot blocking was so well timed, but he's become I don't want to say he's like a great offensive player because there's not much range to his game, but he's become a very efficient scorer. Like, I mean, and you're right. Like the guys, there's enough guys who you have to pay attention to on defense. Shed, Cryer, and Sharp are such magnets that he's going to get some easy looks down low. But man, he's really impressed me, and I think he's kind of like a sort of an underground sort of a guy that nobody's talking about is like a real factor, but I think he's an absolute weapon for that team on both ends. So he's one of my favorite players to watch this year, just because I mean the shot blocking is fun, but and obviously he's an elite rebounder. He's one of the guys who you were talking about, who you don't want the ball in his hands late in the game,
right?
They'll just foul him, but I think he's been a real impact for this team. And when they're going through those droughts where they can't shoot, it's like just get the ball to him and let him dunk the ball.
Yeah.
Like just let him dunk the ball and get back down on defense and you reset your offense. Which is kind of, I mean, it's also sort of what they do. Like, okay, let's get Shed going to the basket, and that'll sort of reset what we're doing. But when that's not working, I think Francis is a good option for them.
Well, and I think Juwan Roberts too. He's one of the few guys who can get his own shot in the paint. And there are stretches where they don't get him the ball down there, but when they do, yeah. And I got to tell these guys, any other team, hey, he's left-handed. He can go left. Nobody seems to want to stop him going that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's another guy that people don't talk a lot about, but he'll quietly put up, 10 and 9 boards. But he's one of those other guys that can stop the scoring drought. And
Yep.
and I mean, I think they've got, they don't have the depth because they've had some injuries. I mean, they miss. I can't remember the kid's name now. I'm totally blanking, but and Emmanuel Sharp is just getting better and better, right? Terrence Arsenault, that's who I was thinking of. But yeah. So I think they're a fun team to watch, and I just enjoy it. I enjoy every game, and it's one of those things. Like my doctor was telling me, it's like one of the symptoms of this is you quit taking joy in stuff. And man, I can't wait for every UH game, and I watch every minute, and I love it, and they're fun to watch, and I hope this run lasts all the way to the finals. And I think they've had better talent. Hell, they had better talent last year. They had Walker and Sasser, but this may be their best collection of Kelvin Sampsonites. If I
think so.
Didn't have another word.
They're all bought in.
Yeah.
They're all bought in. And I actually worried about LJ Cryer. Like, I didn't know if he was going to, because I mean, listen, the Baylor way of life is so different than the Houston way of life, at least from a head coaching standpoint, that I didn't know if it was going to work. And he's been phenomenal too. So, listen, there's not many more games for them that are going to be interesting. I mean, I think the season finale at home against Kansas is going to be fun. But their last 2 road games are Oklahoma and I think Central Florida.
Yeah, Central Florida.
And then, but I think the Big 12 tournament is going to be,
it's gonna be
incredible.
That's going to be fun, man.
There's so many teams. Like if you told me BYU was going to win it, I'd be like, okay.
I can see that.
You told me Kansas is going to win it. I said, no, okay. Iowa State, Houston, maybe, probably not Texas, but like you get my point. Like it feels like it's wide open. So I'm stoked for that tournament, man.
And just one quick thought from you on Baylor. What I'm concerned about with them moving forward, because that's a very talented team. That freshman
Sure
is going to be amazing in the NBA. But
Jacoby Walter or Missy, the
No,
big.
Walter, not Missy.
Yeah.
Missy is he's got a lot of development to go, I think. But Walter is just, I mean, polished, great shooter,
Yep.
creates all kinds of things. But what worries me about Baylor, and the UH loss doesn't count as one of them, but they've got now 7 one-possession losses this year, I think, is the number. And that should have been a one-possession loss. It was overtime.
Yeah.
It worries me going into the tournament because you're going to have a lot of one-possession games, at least a couple. I think it gets in your head, right? You start doing little things that cost you the game. Are you worried about that with Baylor?
Sure. I worry about that with all teams that lose close games. And I think I tweeted or quote tweeted a clip a few weeks back of Kentucky. And they've had like 5 or 6 games where they had the ball at the end of the game, the final possession, with a chance to either tie or take the lead. And it was like 5. It showed every one of those possessions, and they were all fucking disasters. And I was like, this is the kind of team I don't want to back in March. And I've been slowly coming around on Kentucky. And then what they did at the end of that Mississippi State game the other day, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Like Reed Shepherd, I mean, he had like 11 points in the last 90 seconds or whatever it was, and hits a floater in the lane to win it, like basically at the buzzer, a 2-point win. I was like, okay, they're maybe creeping back into that circle of trust, because their finish to the game at Florida was a disaster.
Yeah.
Their finish to the game at Texas A&M was a disaster. And I'm like, maybe not. But this Mississippi State game gave me a little bit of hope that maybe something is there. So I'm with you. I'd like to see. I like teams that are great finishing teams. The stat with Jerome Tang at Kansas State continues to wow me. That he's like, I think now some like 14-0 in overtime games.
Yeah,
like the fact that
crazy.
14 overtime games in 2 years is insane. But yeah, he doesn't lose in overtime. He just keeps winning over and over and over. That's wild to me. But I will say with Baylor, like we've seen them win a couple close ones too, which makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
Now the wins that they like when they beat Iowa State, they beat them at home by a couple points. You probably shouldn't even be having you shouldn't be playing with your food like that.
Right.
That should be a clear win. It's kind of like the win when they were, I forget, I think it was Oklahoma State. They were overtime on the road against Oklahoma State, and they won in overtime. But it's like, what the hell were you doing in overtime with Oklahoma State?
Right.
So they've shown an ability to win some of those close games too, but it's usually in games where I'm like, why are you even in this position? You shouldn't be playing overtime against BYU. You shouldn't be in a close. I think Cincinnati was the other one, a close game with Cincinnati at home. That shouldn't be a thing. So this Baylor team, I think their defense is bad enough that I'm not in love with them. I think Scott Drew teams are going to always have like pretty strong defense. This is a pretty bad defensive team, really.
Yeah.
I think if they're kind of like Miami last year. You catch them on the wrong night and they'll beat you. They can beat anybody if they get hot from 3, and they don't turn the ball over. Which UH showed that's the weakness of that offense. They're 205th in turnover percentage nationally on offense. So if you can turn them over, you can beat them. But if you don't turn them over and you just let them shoot, they're as good as anybody on that side of the ball. The defense, though, is a real concern. Like it doesn't seem like they have like the dogs that they need. I think back to like the 2022 team that had Akinjo and Jeremy Sohan and those guys, and it was just like it felt like they were guys who prioritized defense. And even like what's his name, Chamwa Chachwa, the everyday John, like was always like a dude who defended constantly. And they don't have that anymore. It's not their mentality. It doesn't seem, and it's weird. Like last year, their defense was kind of meh, and I think they were good enough on offense that it let them beat. I mean, I get they lost in the second round of the tournament, so they obviously weren't that damn good. But I think that's what cost them was their defense just wasn't good enough. This year it's worse. So that's a bad sign. I think Scott Drew's one of the best coaches in the country, so I tend to give him the benefit of the doubt. But I'm just not sure what the ceiling of this team is, quite honestly.
Yeah, and just to get back to the UH game, I mean, the whole first half, UH would just get on the elbow, and somebody would get inside, and they just couldn't stop it. And they made some adjustments in the second half, but at some point, you call a timeout and adjust right there. I mean, that play worked. That play worked like 10 times. Lamont asked if UH wins, will Sampson retire? I wouldn't be surprised. I think he'd like to see Kellen get his chance, and we'll see. So I'll take that trade if it happens as a UH fan. But all right, I love talking college basketball with AJ. AJ is one of the best college basketball minds in the country. And if you guys didn't appreciate that when we were in Houston, then I hope you do now. Just real quick, 2 SEC teams that I'm intrigued by because they can score: Auburn and Alabama.
Again, these are teams who they're much like Baylor. If Alabama's hot, yeah, they can beat anybody, but their defense is shitty. Mm-hmm. And you kind of saw it against Kentucky.
Yeah, what Kentucky put up 117 on them, I think it was
117. Yeah. And it looked like, it looked like they kind of got lucky against Ole Miss last night. And you look at the final score and they won by 15 points. I had Ole Miss +6, which was a kind of a kick in the balls. But Ole Miss was up, but 14 points in that game. Like Alabama couldn't get a stop. Luckily they were, for them anyway, they were nuclear from 3.
Yeah.
And you shoot 41% from 3, you're going to win a lot of games as long as especially if you don't turn it over. And they do take good care of the ball, which is something I like, but they're a very mediocre defensive team. And I think we saw again last night, and so I'll talked about a bet I lost yesterday. I'll talk about a bet I won yesterday. I had Tennessee -5.5 against Auburn. I think Auburn is one of the most home court dependent teams in the country.
Yeah.
I just think that I don't trust them away from home. I think they've only got 3 wins or 3 or 4 wins in conference away from home, and it's all against like the bottom feeders. But they've lost now 4 games that are on the road in conference, and most of them haven't even been competitive. So that's a team that I don't want to trust, especially their defense is solid. Johnny Broome is one of my favorite players, like a guy who transferred in. He was one of my favorite. He transferred in before last year, but at Morehead State was one of my favorite, like mid-major kind of guys. But also right now, I talked about this with Kansas. Keep in mind that Auburn right now is, I guess, Jalen Williams played. I don't think he's healthy. I don't think he's right.
Yeah.
What I understood was he was going to miss the regular season and then try to come back for the tournament. And so I was surprised to see him out there last night, and he just didn't look like himself. I think they need that team, or they need that guy to be healthy to really have a shot. But also, I'm picking at him for losing at Tennessee, and there's really no shame in that. Like everybody loses at Tennessee. It's almost like SEC's Kansas. It's a very tough place to win.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know what their ceiling is, because they do get stuck in the mud on offense sometimes, particularly when Jalen Williams isn't having a day. And Broome is almost I don't want to say he's like a nothing burger on offense, but he's not an offensive focused player. Like he's there to rebound and do the dirty work, block shots. So I think if those guards and the wings get right in the tournament, I could see them making a little bit of a run, but it just feels like they're so home court dependent that I don't want to trust them.
Man, I'm so looking forward to the next few weeks having you on to talk about this once we get into conference tournaments and then obviously the NCAA. I'm not blowing smoke up AJ's ass. He's been great at college basketball forever, not just at betting, but he knows everything about it. And it's just a pleasure to sit here. And I didn't expect for us to spend this much time on college basketball today, but I love it. So,
well, we never would have done this on the radio, because like on radio, nobody wants to hear about college basketball for 20 minutes. It's a hard topic, especially in the regular season. Like once March comes around, everybody wants their sports radio guys to be experts on college basketball, and every sports radio guy tries to pretend like they're an expert on college basketball, because that's what they've got to talk about.
Right.
And they, all of a sudden they have to look at standings and go, yeah, this team's good, this team's not good, even though they haven't seen them play a game all year.
This is a 12 seed that can beat a 5.
Yeah. Well, they'll hear somebody say that, and then they're going to go, yep, sounds good to me.
Yep.
Sounds good to me.
Sally's secretary's filling out her bracket based on that. And, and that was always something that I thought was cool about the show is like, you knew college basketball. We'd always spend a little time on it no matter what during the season. But same thing with, MMA. Like when there was a big MMA fight, all these guys would act like they were experts. It's like, AJ's been pretty good at this for a long time. Don't really need you cats.
Yeah.
All right. I will tell you this. If you need a plumber, call Piper's Plumbing, 832-632-2583. My man Joseph and his wife, they run a great company, and they're in Nassau Bay, but they do work everywhere. They did work for my neighbor who's sitting out on my porch right now, actually putting up some lights for me so I don't fall on my ass. But he did some work for him, and he just raved about him. My business raved about him. They can do plumbing, water heater replacement, tankless water heater installation, main water line repair and replacement, gas test and gas line repair and replacement. All this stuff they can do for you. Give them a call, 832-632-2583. And I'm really looking forward to the tournament. But I will just say, from a betting perspective too. I mean, AJ's going to do you right, so it'll be worth every penny you pay for this podcast, which is absolutely nothing, and that's okay. If you want to donate, please do. I got to tell you, ambulances are not cheap. MRIs are not cheap. The medical bills from this fucking thing are starting to roll in. I'm like, oh, goddamn. Right when I'm about to get ahead again. It's just crazy stuff. So the Venmo's on there. If you want to help with a few bucks, please do. All right, let's get some football because we got the combine going on. And, from a quarterback perspective, I think I'm really concerned about Caleb Williams. I think he showed us some pussy tendencies last year. And
that's my worry too.
As a leader, I don't like that. I mentioned this Monday, and I want to get your thoughts on Drake May because I don't feel like I know what kind of player he is. I feel like I've watched him play. He looks good, but is he, Sam Howell? Is he Mitch Trubisky? I don't know. I just can't get a good feel on him. I do like Jaden Daniels a lot if the coaching staff can shorten that delivery, because that's the one thing that concerns me. He's got that big loopy throwing motion, which in college is fine. You're not supposed to fix that in college. You don't need to. But in the pros, man, you got to get that ear to ear, and it's got to be tight. If you could fix that, his other skills are pretty good. I guess if you're the number one pick and you're the Bears, do you trade Justin Fields and take one of these cats? And if so, which one? Or do you say, you know what, I'm going to keep Justin Fields and take Harrison or the kid from Washington or somebody like that as a receiver?
So first, I'll hit the Drake May one first. I think like at his best, he's going to be Carson Palmer pre-injury. Like if he's that,
that's pretty good. Yeah,
it's awesome. Like I've heard people compare him a little bit to Justin Herbert, which obviously, as you know, I'm a big fan of. But I think there's also like I can also see him being Blake Bortles, like So it's I'm no expert on it. Like I know that he was a year ago looked at or even 2 years ago, like we were already talking about him being like the dude in this class, and then Caleb Williams kind of broke out. But I think he's good. I think he's got more mobility than people think he does. He's a better runner, a better scrambler. And that part reminds me a little bit of Justin Herbert. Like people don't think about Justin Herbert as a scrambler, but the dude can move around. And I think the like hoping that he's the high end is obviously what everybody's going to do, but you have to take into account that it might not work out that way. And that's the scary part. So if you draft Blake Bortles number 2 overall, it sets you back quite a bit. As far as the Bears, I think it's very dependent on what kind of offer they get. If they get the same kind of offer they got a year ago, I think they should do it. Like
Absolutely.
Justin Fields is serviceable enough, and there's still enough potential upside that you can ride him for one more year and continue to build that team, and then take a stab at quarterback next year. Now, the only way you don't do that is if you think Caleb Williams is like a generational talent, and if you think he's, Andrew Luck level prospect, then okay, and no one's going to blame you for taking him. And just like Justin Fields is probably never going to be that. So if you think he can be that, then you probably should get him. But if I'm the Bears, I want to keep stacking up those assets and build a roster where you can put a rookie quarterback in there and he can compete immediately. And if you've got enough talent, and that's why I think it was such a big deal last year that in that trade that they did with the Panthers, they got DJ Moore. Like that was to me as important as any draft because they didn't have a number one receiver. So getting a number one receiver on top of all those draft picks was like, that's a huge get. So I think if you can get another deal like that, go for it. I just wonder if people seeing the Bryce Young thing are like, ooh, I don't know if it's worth trading up. But I said this to somebody, to Scott, my co-host on the podcast. Yeah. He was like, I think teams are going to be turned off by that because Bryce Young now they're set back. And I said, yeah, but think about this. If the Bears make that trade or the Panthers make that trade, move up to number one, and they take CJ Stroud, and obviously it's a jump to say that CJ Stroud would have been the same in Carolina as he was in Houston. I don't think he would, but let's just pretend he could be. Like, no, the Panthers wouldn't regret that trade then. They'd say, fuck, what a great trade. We gave up some stupid draft picks and we got our franchise guy. You know what I mean? So it's just like people were laughing at the Texans a year ago for trading up. And it's like, no, you got the right guys. That's all. Like, if you trade up, people forget that you traded up. Like, no one cares. If you trade up and you get the wrong guy, people are like, what a fucking dumb move. Yeah. So it's just a matter of do you like it? No, remember, I still think about this. Grosses me out kind of. But the Chiefs traded up from Buffalo to get Patrick Mahomes. And I always think, what if the Bills would have drafted Patrick Mahomes? And it's not a straight across deal. Like, we don't know if he would have been in Buffalo what he was in Kansas City, but we're talking about like a generational, like once in a lifetime type quarterback that you traded the pick where you could have taken him. And I mean, the Bills probably have the second best quarterback in football. So I don't think they're crying in their soup too much, but it's always one of those things. Like, no Kansas City Chiefs fans are going, they probably don't even think about the fact that they traded away extra draft capital to get Patrick, no matter what it took to get him. You just get the guy. And so I think there's going to be teams willing to do it if they think Caleb Williams is the guy. And if you're the Bears and you think Caleb Williams is the guy, I think you're kind of stuck having to take him, because I know Justin Fields is not the guy. I can't picture a world where Justin Fields wins a Super Bowl. I can picture a world where Justin Fields is serviceable and maybe sneaks into the back end of the playoffs, but I don't think he's like the kind of dude who can go on a run and win a Super Bowl. So that's how the Bears have to look at it. Like, if they think Caleb Williams is like a no doubter, can't miss guy, I think they should take him. But if someone offers the moon and you've got any doubts about him, I'd move on. Or I mean, hell, I would take if I could get JJ McCarthy and a first and a third, I'd take that over Caleb Williams. So if somebody says, hey, we're going to give you our first, which is like the 8th pick in the draft or whatever, and a first next year and then a third, yeah, like so if that way you can get a quarterback probably in the top 10, JJ McCarthy type, and then you can if he works, great. If he doesn't, you've got draft capital now where you can take another swing. People always laugh about once you take a quarterback in the first round, there's no going back. Arizona didn't. They said, fuck that. We know Josh Rosen's no good. We're not going to waste time with it. And they went and got Kyler Murray. And I like, now it's not like Arizona's had a bunch of success, but no one questions that move. Like, there's no doubt that Arizona made the right call by doing that, because Kyler Murray at least has a chance. Again, I don't know what his ceiling is. I don't know if he can win a Super Bowl, but I don't know for certain that he can't either. Like he's at least got enough potential where I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. That's you've got your franchise guy. Whereas with Josh Rosen, all you were doing was just wasting time.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Josh Rosen was Will Levis now. But anyway, the one thing I'd point out is if they were to trade Fields to the Bears, which there seems to be which there seems to be a lot of steam towards. Steelers are a better team with Justin Fields. I don't think there's any doubt. He's going to be better than anybody they've got in that quarterback room, and they're already a playoff team. So I think he goes there. The Steelers are better. And if I'm the Bears and I can trade down, and I do think there's some good quarterback value that you'll be able to get later, and go get a Dunze in the draft, or Bowers. Get you a big weapon like that, and I think either one of those guys are going to be impact players. I really believe that. Then go get Bo Nix later, or somebody like that, or I think Penix, same thing. Go get one of those guys. They might be pretty good. They might be an upgrade. They might be the same. But man, if you put those kind of weapons around them, I think you'd be better off, and I'd like to see the Bears do something like that. If somebody will try, somebody's got to fall in love with Caleb Williams. It's going to happen.
I think somebody will. It might be the Giants. It might be the Broncos. I think
on that one.
There's a lot of teams. It might be the Raiders. I think there's a lot of teams that could jump into that mix.
What are the Raiders going to do a quarterback? Because that's I've been wondering about that. They do have.
They have to find one. I don't think there's any doubt. Like what they had last year at the end of the year wasn't good enough. I think they've burned the bridge with Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think they have to find another answer.
Yeah, and I'm intrigued by what they're going to do, and I think there will be some guys like what happens with Baker Mayfield. Does somebody want to do that? I think you're limited with your ceiling with Baker, but I mean he's functional in the right situation. We found, and I think he had a really good year for Tampa last year, and if you can get that out of him, well, you're probably a playoff team if you've got the other talent.
Yeah, I think Baker's going to stay in Tampa. I think he's earned that. And my expectation is that he's going to get at least like a 3-year deal there. I think that they do right by him. So I don't think he's in the mix, but Kirk Cousins is like, right. Why not?
And I could see another team I could see moving up is Washington. I could see them making a deal to try to get a quarterback, especially with new coaching staff, all of that. And again, it just depends on who you fall in love with. And I think somebody's also going to fall in love with Jaden Daniels once he tests out this week. I mean, that guy physically is a monster. And if you get to spend some time with him, like I said, my only concern about him, and another guy, man, if you're the Bears, go get Malik Neighbors if you can't get somebody else. That guy's going to be badass. But the thing about Daniels, and I think you can coach it out of him, like they did Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson had the same kind of loopy delivery coming out of college. And everybody's like, oh, well, you should fix that in college. You don't need to in college. The guy's effective as hell. He won the Heisman Trophy. So yeah. I don't need to fix his delivery in college. But, some of the decision making, you just don't. But you don't know that about any of those guys, except, it's one of those things. Like, and you mentioned Mahomes earlier. He wound up in a perfect situation.
Yeah.
And he could sit for a year behind Alex Smith. I mean, not many guys are going to get that opportunity because when drafted this high, the pressure's on him. Hell, C.J. Stroud, he should have been able to sit for a little bit, but it turns out he's the best guy on campus as soon as they bring him in. But you look back, I mean, the Texans tried it with Deshaun. What did that last, a half?
Right.
Of course, that was Bill O'Brien, too, which good luck at Boston College, Billy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys are going to be 6-6. Mega Mac asks, are any of these quarterbacks franchise QBs in the upcoming draft? And he says maybe Jaden if he goes to the right team. And so much of that, and AJ and I have been talking about this for years. So much is the position you go into. Bryce Young is probably better than Bryce Young played last year, but impossible situation, right? And nothing around him, no weapons, bad coaching, bad offensive line. And there's not many guys. And you talked about CJ. CJ wouldn't have been as good there. It wouldn't have been close. And I think that's part of it. And there's a lot of guys that can really be great quarterbacks in the right situation.
I worry about Jaden Daniels. Like, yeah, I mean, was he a great college player? I don't think anyone would argue it, but I mean, he had probably 2 of the top 5 wide receivers in this year's draft on his team. Like, would it shock anyone if he can't play, he can't really perform at the next level the way he did in college? It wouldn't shock me at all. If he was if he was Justin Fields number 2, like that wouldn't shock me. So I think there's boom bust potential with all these guys. The reason why I feel like, I mean, whatever you think of Caleb Williams off field stuff, which I'm with you, I don't love. No one's going to look back and say, I can't believe you drafted Caleb Williams with the first pick. I think like if you draft Jaden Daniels with like the 3rd, 4th pick, there will be people who said, like they did about Mitch Trubisky. The guy had 1 good year in college and you like decided to throw the moon at him. That's on you. So I could see that happening. It wouldn't shock me, but I that's the one thing I do know is if you draft Caleb Williams, number 1, if his head falls off, no one's going to go, I can't believe you did that. It was like with Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence has been basically a disappointment so far. But no one's going to look at the Jags and go, man, you guys really screwed up taking Trevor Lawrence. Like they had to.
Yeah, and he hasn't been bad. He just hasn't been what they expected yet. The one comp I would say, and the one, because like I always had my questions about Ohio State quarterbacks, including CJ, because he's got all these receivers, he's got all that talent around him. But our friend Jose Burrow had maybe 2 of the best receivers in the NFL now. He had an elite running back, an elite offensive line, and that was a concern coming out. So he's surrounded with all this talent, and he's worked out pretty well. And I think in the other comp I'll make to Burrow is Bo Nix. I mean, Burrow was not a good player at Ohio State.
No, I say this all the time. It's like the dumbest I've ever felt was when the year that LSU won the national championship. Preseason, I remember saying, if they had anybody with a pulse at quarterback, this would be a national championship team. But Joe Burrow sucks. And then Joe Burrow goes on to have like the most legendary season ever.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, I was wrong about it. But until that point, Joe Burrow had shown no indication that he was going to turn into Joe Burrow. Like he looked the guy.
Okay, I'm going to push back on it a little bit because I said this at the time. The last part of his junior year before that, it was like a light came on. He was, of course, I didn't see that year coming. I'm not Nostradamus, but I thought the last part of his junior year, you could just see, okay, this guy's turned a corner. And I think we saw that with Bo Nix last year. And I still talk to SEC fans, like, oh, Bo Nix is horseshit. Like, have you watched him play at Oregon? Sometimes guys develop, and he's had 6 years in college. I think he's pretty pro ready right now. And I think the upside is still there. And that's a guy that if you wind up taking him mid-round, I'm not going to bitch at you. I'm going to say, you know what? I like that pick.
Yeah, I'm not going to fault anybody. I talked to Lance Zierlein the other day, and he thinks Bo Nix has a first-round grade. So we'll see if he gets drafted in the first round. But he's one of the guys that I look at as, would I rather take Bo Nix with the 32nd pick? Or would I rather take Jaden Daniels with the 3rd? I'd rather take Bo Nix with the 32nd pick. Like I just feel more comfortable with it. But again, it's all going to be a matter of opinion. And like Bo Nix has been solid enough for long enough that I trust him. We all saw Auburn Bo Nix, and nobody thought that Auburn Bo Nix was going to turn into what he did either.
Right.
But you know what? I'd also look at guys like, to me, if I'd look at a guy like Michael Penix, if I could get him in round 2, and I know that the medicals are probably kind of iffy on him because he's had a couple of injuries, but I feel like that's a guy who can really play football and really can make the reads and is a smart player, man. And if Brock Purdy can be Brock Purdy, there's no reason why Michael Penix can't be Brock Purdy.
Right.
There really isn't. And if people are going to be scared off because he's not a physical freak, and if Michael Penix could run like he was able to run as a freshman, nobody would be talking about him as not being a first rounder. It would be impossible to deny he's a first rounder. So he's not going to be, Lamar Jackson. I get it. But he's still nobody's going to look at him and go, "Oh, he's immobile." Like
Right.
to me, he reminds me a lot of Russell Wilson.
Yeah. I think that's a fair call.
And I mean, he's obviously a little bit bigger frame or a little taller frame, but I think that he's a guy who is. There's some things about him physically that you don't love, but I think he's smart enough and he understands the game well enough that he's going to overcome some of those. And again, I don't know if he'll be elite, but Russell Wilson won a freaking Super Bowl,
Yeah.
And like I said, Brock Purdy almost won a Super Bowl. Like, I don't see any reason why Michael Penix can't be the next one of those guys.
And he's such a good decision maker, which I really like about him. And he's also a guy that I saw check off to his second and third reads in college. And, that's another big thing because a lot of those guys don't have to. It's a lot of times, and as good as Odunze was, he wasn't 10 yards open every play because he was getting doubled every time. But he would look there and then he would check down, and I like the kid, man. I that's another one. I think him or Nix, if I could get them and get an impact player in the top 10, I'd take that shot, because if they don't work out, great. You do it again next year. You do what the Arizona did. You just pull a plug. Say, you know what, This kid doesn't work. All right. Well, great stuff, man. I could talk draft all day too, but we've gone long enough today. I've taken up enough of your time, my friend. I appreciate you. Thanks for looking out for me last week. And I didn't die today.
Nah.
And I'm not gonna collapse after the show, so it's all good. And I actually made a little sense today. So there. But anyway, appreciate you, brother. And I'll talk to you soon about some other stuff. And just happy to see you, happy to have you on, and happy to be able to remember it this time.
That's the way. I like that. All right, brother. Take care, man.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon. Okay, guys, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. Thanks to all of you for, putting up with me. And, I especially last week, I appreciate all of you. And welcome in Heartthrob, by the way. I didn't see you in Mega Mac. It's, we're going to have fun with this. We're going to keep doing a fun show. Jerry Bone Nose in the house. Appreciate all you guys. We will be back on Monday in some capacity. Keep an eye on Twitter and Facebook. I'll let you know. Jerry and I are going to get our thing going, but we have to, but there's some stuff we're working on. We were supposed to do it the day after he won the tournament in Louisiana, which would have been badass, but we got a couple things to work through. So just keep an eye on Twitter and Facebook, and I'll let you know. There will be a show on Monday of some kind. And anyway, love all you guys. Have a great day. And until Monday, stay sportsy, Gulf Coast badasses.